A racist police officer brutally kicked an elderly black man, suspecting him of wrongdoing for carrying a large bag, completely unaware that the man was a former CIA agent. The revelation that follows leaves the officer speechless. This story is not just about a personal confrontation, but serves as a powerful reminder of courage, unity, and the strength of a community. Before delving into this dramatic tale, share where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. George Michael is an elderly man, but his calm and composed demeanor today cannot hide the incredible experiences of his past. A former CIA agent, George lived through bloody wars and perilous missions in places most people would never dare to set foot. Those years shaped a man who could not be taken lightly, and the achievements and scars he carries will never fade from his memory. The memories of his days in combat never leave him. George wasn't just an agent. He was part of covert wars where life and death were separated by a single step. He recalls sleepless nights and life-or-death confrontations where every decision, no matter how small, could change everything. Those missions took him through the dense Amazon jungles, chaotic Middle Eastern streets, and brutal conflict zones in Eastern Europe, where every step he took was shadowed by danger lurking around every corner. Once, he recalls a mission in Kabul, where he and his team faced a ruthless terrorist group. Long days hiding in the shadows, illuminated only by faint beams from flashlights through the cracks of ruined houses, made him acutely aware that death could strike at any moment. But when faced with the enemy's cruelty, George learned an invaluable lesson. Patience and composure are vital for survival. Those days, filled with split-second decisions, taught him that nothing is more precious than his life and the lives of his comrades. Though a strong, seasoned, and resilient man, George found it challenging to leave his past behind. Each night, he was haunted by nightmares of intense battles, fallen comrades, and irreparable mistakes. These memories remained an indelible part of his soul. After leaving the CIA, George sought peace in a small community, far from the memories of war, where he could rediscover life's meaning. Still, even as he stepped out of the shadow of his past, he knew his mission was not over. George didn't want to be a hero or a celebrity. He simply wanted to contribute to the community he had chosen as his home after years of war. This was a humble community, devoid of glory or fame. But for George, it was where he found peace. The people in the neighborhood didn't know much about his past. They only knew him as a wise man who had endured many hardships and always offered valuable advice to the young, those seeking direction in life. Gradually, George's stories of resilience, sacrifice, and the value of loyalty became a source of inspiration for many in the community. Every time George stepped into this community, he felt the warmth and trust everyone gave him. He stood before them, not to talk about his heroic exploits or dangerous missions, but to share life lessons he had gleaned from his years of service in the CIA. These were lessons about sacrifice, putting the greater good above personal interests, and, most importantly, living in a world where cruelty and inhumanity often prevailed. Though no longer engaged in dangerous missions, George felt his purpose had never ended. He knew his strength didn't just lie in what he had accomplished in the past, but also in what he could do for his current community. For George, the work he was doing now was no less significant. The young people he mentored, those he guided, would carry forward the lessons he had learned and contribute to society in their own ways. In these simple moments, George felt he could still achieve great things. These deeds weren't written in newspapers or history books, but were remembered in the hearts of those he had helped. This community was where he found the true meaning of life. After years of service in the CIA, George Michael was not just an elderly man seeking peace, but also someone who chose to set an example for the younger generation in the community where he had settled. He became a mentor to those around him, sharing the invaluable lessons life had taught him during years of combat and service. George's stories of the past weren't about glorious victories, but hard-earned lessons from grueling and harsh experiences. He didn't just recount dangerous missions as an agent, but spoke of critical decisions made in life-or-death situations, moments where life hung by a fragile thread. One story he often shared was about a mission where he infiltrated a perilous conflict zone, where every step could mean death. He risked his safety to protect his comrades and achieve a common goal. In the most dangerous moments, you can't let emotions take over, George often told the young people in the community. At those times, you must let reason guide you, stay calm, and figure out solutions even when everything around you is falling apart. Patience is a survival skill. You can't act impulsively when everything pushes you to the edge. George's words were not just lessons in patience, but reminders of how to face challenges and stress in life. He encouraged everyone, especially the youth, never to give up when faced with adversity. George understood that life was never easy, and he wanted to convey to the community that difficulties were opportunities for growth and strength. He shared situations where he had to fend for himself, and moments when he had to choose between life and death. But each decision was not just about survival. It was a lesson in loyalty and responsibility. However, more than anything, George wanted to emphasize the importance of community bonds. He didn't just teach people how to face personal challenges, but stressed that a strong community was the foundation that helped individuals overcome all hardships. "We are not just separate individuals," George said, his sharp, calm eyes meeting each person in the crowd. "We are part of a larger picture. Each person in this community has value, and only by standing together and supporting one another can we become truly strong." He encouraged everyone to help each other, from small gestures like assisting neighbors in need to creating an environment where everyone felt safe and could thrive. George's community was not a place where people merely lived side by side without care. It was a place where everyone knew they could rely on others in times of trouble, and where each person felt a responsibility to help those around them. In community-centered discussions, George often sat with the youth seeking direction in life. He shared stories of comrades who had sacrificed their lives, of small but meaningful victories in seemingly hopeless situations. These weren't just tales of war or espionage, but of resilience, self-belief, and the noble values of a soldier, a friend, and a community member. "We can't live in darkness forever," he often concluded his talks. "No matter what, we must look forward and always remember that, no matter how strong we are, no one can survive alone in this life." Through every story and lesson, George Michael not only inspired the younger generation, but also built a united, strong community. He knew that nothing was more important than facing and overcoming life's challenges together. This community had become his second home, where he could continue his battle, not against external enemies, but against the difficulties and trials faced by each member of the community. As George Michael continued speaking with calm wisdom about respect and duty within the community, an unexpected interruption came from Officer Travis Hart. Travis, a young police officer recently assigned to maintain order in the area, entered the room. However, he did not bring with him the humility or sense of service one would expect from a police officer. Instead, Travis walked in with an air of arrogance and blatant disrespect, especially as he began to interrupt George without a second thought. All eyes turned toward Travis as the sound of his heavy boots echoed on the wooden floor. The room fell silent as he approached. Travis seemed to take pride in his new uniform, the shiny badge reflecting the room's light. His smug expression betrayed the disdain he felt for those around him, especially George, whom Travis did not respect. "Hey, old man," Travis began, his voice cutting and sharp like a blade. "Are you sure you belong here?" His words were not just provocative, but a slap in the face to everything George had worked to build in the community. The room was momentarily silent, the tension palpable. The younger people in the room felt indignation rising, but they all looked to George, hoping he would handle the situation with his usual composure. Travis stepped closer, his attitude becoming even more pronounced. His gaze was cold, yet beneath it lay a faint trace of unease he didn't recognize. He moved toward George as if to dominate him with his presence. "This place is for people who contribute to the community, not for old men sitting around telling outdated stories," Travis said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. At that moment, the room was completely still. All eyes were on George, waiting for his response. But George didn't speak right away. He stood there, silently looking at Travis. His eyes held no anger, no defensiveness, just absolute calm. "Do you realize what you just said?" George asked, his voice low and steady, each word carefully measured. Travis faltered for a moment, but quickly regained his arrogant stance. "I said, people like you are useless here. This is a place for real action, not hollow moral lessons." A faint smile appeared on George's face. Not a mocking smile, but one of understanding. "Real action, you say? Do you think shouting and intimidating others is real action? I've seen people like you before, Travis. Those who believe power lies in control. But let me tell you this. Real power isn't something you impose on others. It's something you build within yourself, through the respect you earn, not the fear you instill." Those words hit Travis like a blow. For a moment, he was at a loss for words. George's composure unsettled him more than anything else. No one had ever spoken to him like this before, and though he didn't want to admit it, those words awakened a sense of insecurity he had long tried to bury. "You're taking up space meant for others," Travis said, his words dripping with disdain. He didn't realize that, as a newcomer, his disrespect would not sit well with the community. George didn't show any sign of frustration, even though Travis's words were undeniably harsh. He remained calm and composed, as he always did. To George, such provocations were merely a small part of the life he had already endured. A memory from years ago suddenly flashed in George's mind, taking him back to his time as a CIA agent in the Middle East. He remembered a tense night in the ruins of a Kabul suburb, where he and his team waited for 48 hours to rescue an American hostage held by a brutal terrorist group. Everything seemed against them: the hostile terrain, the overwhelming enemy forces, and the pressure to keep the mission covert. George had sat in the shadows with his team, observing enemy movements through binoculars. In the silence, he listened to his breathing, every small movement of those around him. When a young teammate lost his nerve and nearly gave away their position, George gently but firmly placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering, "We only have one chance. Fear is natural, but acting on fear will ruin everything." They had held their position until the perfect moment to strike, completing the mission without a single casualty. It was then George realized that patience and composure were the greatest strengths in moments of extreme tension. Returning to the present, George noticed a flicker of insecurity in Travis's eyes, similar to the look in the eyes of the young soldier from his memory. But Travis didn't understand that his anger and aggression were mere shields for the fear and insecurity buried deep within him. In all his years as an agent, George had faced dangerous situations, formidable enemies, and life-or-death decisions far more challenging than this. To him, these insults were insignificant. "Are you sure you fully understand what you're saying?" George asked again, his tone even, devoid of anger or rebellion. "Respect cannot be forced. It must be earned through actions and character. What you've said today shows no respect for those around you, and you cannot lead if you don't know how to treat others with dignity." Travis's eyes flashed with anger, but also with a hint of confusion as he grappled with George's unyielding calmness, something he had never encountered before. He hadn't expected this elderly man to hold his ground so firmly against his provocations. But Travis quickly masked his hesitation, determined not to lose face. "You're just an old man past your prime. I'm the one with the authority here, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop me," Travis declared smugly, continuing his condescending attitude. Travis's deliberate interruptions and rude behavior were more than a lack of courtesy. They were an abuse of power. He saw himself as the authority, wielding power without hesitation to suppress others. But George remained unfazed by this conduct. He looked directly at Travis, steadfast and dignified, knowing that every word and action of his would serve as a lesson, not just for Travis, but for the entire community about respect and character. The room was silent as George and Travis locked eyes, the tension thick in the air. Everyone in the room began to understand that this confrontation was about more than just the two individuals. It was about the values of respect, power, and responsibility within the community. Although Travis stood before George Michael with arrogance and defiance, few knew that his behavior was not simply an insult, but a reflection of a troubled past. His lack of respect and rude demeanor were not without reason. They were the result of a life filled with pressure and deep emotional wounds he had carried since childhood. Travis had grown up in a poor family where his parents constantly struggled to make ends meet. His father, a stern and emotionally distant man, valued strength and discipline, but never offered encouragement or genuine care. His mother, a gentlewoman, did her best to nurture the family but could do little more than watch her husband's coldness. The absence of love and support at home forced Travis to fend for himself from a very young age. With a father who never expressed pride in him, Travis learned to prove himself in his own way. He sought strength and authority wherever he could, not just at home, but in society. As a student, Travis was always the center of attention, not for academic achievements or humility, but for his toughness, cold demeanor, and relentless determination. Deep down, however, Travis felt wounded, longing for the acceptance and love that every child needs. Upon joining the police force, Travis thought he could change his life, seeking recognition and the position he believed he deserved. Yet the job was far from easy. As a young officer, Travis faced immense pressure from superiors and colleagues. He felt thrust into a world where strength and authority were the only means of protection. Every day, he fought not only criminals but also his feelings of inadequacy and lack of validation. Carrying these burdens into his work, Travis began to abuse his power, seeing it as the only way to assert himself and earn respect. His attitude toward George and the community was not just simple disrespect. It was a reaction to unacknowledged emotions from his past. He wanted to prove he could control everything, that only power could give him the value he sought. But in this moment of confrontation with George, as he looked into the steady and understanding eyes of the older man, an unease began to stir in Travis. He sensed a strength in George's words and demeanor that he had never known in his life. Though he maintained his arrogant facade, deep inside, Travis began to question whether the strength he pursued truly brought him the happiness and respect he craved, or whether it was merely a shell hiding a young boy who felt abandoned and unloved. This feeling wasn't new to Travis. Throughout his life, he had struggled with internal conflicts, his desire for recognition clashing with the cost of his reckless actions. But this time, standing before George, a man who had endured a lifetime of hardship and remained steadfast, Travis couldn't help but question his choices. Perhaps, at this very moment, he was beginning to realize that rudeness and abuse of power could never replace true respect, and real strength didn't come from controlling others but from patience, understanding, and compassion. Though reluctant to admit it, the confrontation was forcing Travis to reflect on himself and the path he was walking. As Travis faced George Michael, he wasn't just confronting an elderly man, but a symbol of resilience and respect that he had never fully understood. Travis's provocative words, harsh and laced with arrogance, reflected the insecurities within him. Yet, at this moment, Travis didn't realize that he was grappling with deeper inner conflicts he had never truly confronted. "Who do you think you are, old man?" Travis said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as if trying to diminish George's presence in front of the crowd. "You're just a retired man, a shadow of the past. What you do no longer matters. Everything now belongs to me. I'm the one in charge here, not you." These words weren't just disrespectful, but also a declaration of Travis's perceived authority. To him, everything now had to bow to his control. In these moments, he saw himself as the only one with the right to command, reducing others, no matter their past achievements or rich experiences, to relics of a bygone era. But, as he looked into George's face, he felt something different. There was a calmness and serenity that Travis had never encountered in anyone before. George showed no anger. He simply looked Travis in the eye, his gaze reflecting a steadfastness and dignity that Travis perhaps had never comprehended. After a brief silence, George responded softly, his voice unhurried but heavy with meaning. "Young man, respect isn't something measured by age or titles. It's something earned through actions, through the way you treat others. Respect comes from what you do, not from what you think you deserve." George's words were like a gentle breeze, yet they made Travis pause. He had never heard anyone speak like that, especially not someone he considered past their prime. What George said wasn't mere theory or empty moral lessons. His words were drawn from real experiences that Travis couldn't ignore. Even though Travis tried to maintain his arrogant facade, he couldn't help but sense the strength in George's words, a strength he had never known. Instead of backing down, however, Travis felt even more out of control in the face of George's composure. He couldn't let this man stand before him without asserting his power. Feeling insulted, Travis's anger only grew. His ego wouldn't allow anyone, whether George or anyone else, to challenge his authority without facing consequences. Then, in a moment of unchecked rage, Travis took a step forward and shoved George. The push wasn't as forceful as he intended, but it was enough to make the room hold its collective breath. A few people in the crowd even sat up straighter, their faces filled with concern and indignation. This act wasn't just an attempt to exert brute force. It was the ultimate display of disrespect toward a man who had faced challenges beyond Travis's imagination. When Travis shoved George, a chilling silence enveloped the room. George, his sharp eyes seeming to pierce into the soul of his opponent, remained calm. He took a step back, not out of anger but simply to steady himself, his gaze never leaving Travis. The tension in the air was suffocating, causing everyone in the room to hold their breath. Travis, his face flushed with anger and unspoken embarrassment, clenched his fists, his fingers trembling slightly. His eyes flashed with fury as he realized his action had done nothing to unsettle George. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, but he tried to mask his growing unease with mocking words. "Do you think that calmness means anything, old man? Respect isn't for those who are past their prime." George smiled faintly, but his eyes remained resolute. "You might think so," he said, his voice steady and unyielding, "but respect isn't something you force upon others. It's something you earn through how you treat people." His tone was calm, not loud, but carried a weight that seemed to carve through the thick atmosphere of the room. Despite his age, George exhibited a strength and poise that no one in the room could have anticipated. When Travis shoved him, George didn't let himself lose balance. Instead, he moved gracefully, avoiding the brunt of the shove while maintaining his firm stance. In a brief but powerful moment, George's subtle movement caused Travis to stumble, forcing him to step back and inadvertently humiliate himself in front of the entire community. The crowd remained silent, watching intently as George displayed calm control. His reaction was not just a demonstration of skills honed over years as an agent, but also a profound statement that respect cannot be coerced through violence or the abuse of power. George didn't need to resort to force or drastic measures to make his point. His composure was his strength. Having faced immense challenges in the past, he continued to confront the present with unwavering confidence. The atmosphere in the room began to shift noticeably. Initially, the crowd had felt the tension of the confrontation, their expressions filled with concern and doubt about whether George could withstand Travis's aggressive challenge. But now, seeing George not only unshaken but stronger than ever, they began to perceive the stark contrast between Travis's aggression and George's inner strength. Respectful gazes started to turn toward George. The silence in the room deepened as no one dared to speak. It became clear to everyone present that this was not merely a personal clash between two individuals, but a profound lesson about power, respect, and the transformation of a community through the actions of one person. George had triumphed in this confrontation, not through brute force, but by demonstrating to everyone the value of maintaining dignity in the face of adversity. Travis, who had once seen himself as powerful, now found himself confused and humiliated. He couldn't understand how George could remain so composed and unyielding, yet he couldn't deny that George's calmness was a strength he could never replicate. Although Travis wasn't ready to admit it, his failure in this encounter was undeniable, and a sense of helplessness began to rise within him. This helplessness felt like an undercurrent building within Travis. Though he wasn't ready to openly acknowledge it, deep down, he began to realize that the power he sought to impose wasn't true power. In truth, he wasn't the only one who could hold power in his hands. Facing George's composure and serenity, Travis started to feel lacking, missing the qualities that make someone truly strong and worthy of respect. Meanwhile, the community in the room was no longer silent out of fear or anxiety. They sensed a new energy, a change happening within themselves. It was a realization that they were not weak, nor were they people who could be silenced by one individual's force. They looked at George and saw that, in any circumstance, respect and dignity were values they must defend, not just for themselves, but for the entire community. George's response changed everything. It wasn't just a personal confrontation between him and Travis, but a clear message to everyone in the room. Respect cannot be forced. It must be earned and upheld through one's actions. Despite his efforts to maintain his composure, Travis couldn't deny the growing sense of confusion within him. He stood there, trying to project confidence and authority, but the more he looked into the eyes of the community members, the more he felt his control slipping away. The room was silent. Not a sound could be heard, but the focused gazes of everyone present bore down on him, making him feel exposed under an inescapable spotlight. No longer the powerful young police officer he imagined himself to be, he now stood as a man caught between shame and failure. Travis felt the shift in the atmosphere. Previously, he always believed himself to be someone who could manipulate situations, wielding authority to control everything. But now, confronted by George's calm and steadfast demeanor, he no longer held the upper hand. The people in the room were no longer afraid of him. They didn't see him as a powerful police officer, but as a disrespectful figure who had failed to command respect. He tried to turn away, pretending nothing had happened, but inside, the shame was consuming his thoughts. He couldn't understand why he was so deeply affected. He was supposed to be the one in control here, yet now he felt as though he were standing in a void. His actions had only alienated the people around him further. This overwhelming sense of failure and shame clouded Travis's mind. His thoughts spiraled, riddled with questions he had never dared to ask himself before. Why did I react that way? Why did I misuse my authority? Am I truly strong, or am I just hiding my weaknesses behind power and arrogance? These questions echoed endlessly in his mind, and the more he thought about them, the more lost he felt. The shame wasn't just about losing control of the situation. It stemmed from realizing that he was the one in the wrong. He had forfeited respect, used his authority to bully others, and disrespected those around him. Yet now, in the face of George's calm and dignity, he couldn't help but see that he had been the one lacking respect, that he had been the wrong one. These thoughts weighed heavily on Travis. He had been defeated not just by George, but by his actions. The shame surged within him, making him want to flee from himself. But he knew that no matter how far he ran, the truth of what he had done would remain. This wasn't just a personal failure in a confrontation. It was Travis confronting himself. Everything he once believed, the values he had built around power and control, was now crumbling. The sense of helplessness and failure served as a stark reminder that true strength doesn't come from authority or manipulation, but from respect and self-control. Travis turned away, his eyes red with shame, unable to look anyone in the room in the eye. He couldn't stay there any longer, unable to endure the weight of their gazes. Part of him wanted to leave, to escape this moment. But he knew that no matter where he went, the truth of his actions would follow him. And in that moment, Travis realized he had to face the consequences of what he had done. As he left the room, Travis didn't hear the murmurs around him, but within his mind, questions about himself and his actions continued to echo, pulling him into an unrelenting internal struggle. After the event, as Travis left the room in shame, the community was no longer silent. Their gazes were now fixed on George, filled not only with respect but also admiration. They had witnessed a confrontation that wasn't about physical strength, but about dignity and determination. George hadn't responded with violence or anger, but with calm, a quality that Travis and many others lacked. When a video of the confrontation quickly made its way to social media, it immediately captured the attention of viewers, particularly within the community. The footage showing George standing firm against Travis highlighted the calmness, strength, and integrity George embodied. People who had previously experienced Travis's disrespect and abuse of power began to speak out. Stories of Travis's past misuse of authority spread widely, exposing the community's pent-up frustration over his behavior. Residents recounted incidents where he had exploited his position to make others' lives difficult, from biased enforcement of laws to unchecked displays of power and intimidation. The videos and stories quickly gained traction, drawing attention from those outside the community as well. Complaints about Travis's behavior came not only from those he had wronged, but also from witnesses to his misuse of authority. Formerly silent individuals, those who had felt powerless to change the situation, now began to find strength within themselves and the community. They realized they were not alone. This event united them, empowering them to speak out, demand change, and seek justice. The sense of unity and empowerment spread through the community, making people realize that no one had to live in fear when standing up for their rights and dignity. Young individuals, once burdened by Travis's oppressive behavior, now felt they could fight for fairness. The community came to understand that their strength didn't lie in individual power, but in collective solidarity. They realized that by acting together, they could bring about real change. Where do you think the strength of a united community comes from? Have you ever witnessed a group of people effect significant change? Share your thoughts in the comments. They began organizing meetings, sharing their stories, and discussing ways to transform not only their community, but also the broader policing system. They sought solutions to ensure that no one could abuse power unchecked. This movement wasn't just about holding Travis accountable. It was a wake-up call for the community to become stronger in protecting its rights. Small protests, community meetings, and discussions about fairness began to emerge everywhere. People didn't just empathize with the victims of Travis's actions. They united to build a stronger community where power couldn't be abused, and everyone could live with respect and justice. George didn't seek to become the center of attention. He didn't want his image to be a symbol. Yet, it was undeniable that his calmness and integrity had inspired others, especially Kara Mitchell. Kara was one of the first to recognize the importance of standing up against injustice. Before Travis arrived in the community, Kara had been an energetic and confident individual. However, an incident where local authorities wronged her family by taking their farmland had left her disillusioned about her ability to effect change. She had lost faith in fighting back. When George arrived, she quietly observed him. His way of speaking, his calmness, and his determination gradually reignited her sense of hope. In private conversations with George, she shared her pain from the past, and he not only listened but offered advice she had never heard before. "I've failed before, George. I stood up and was pushed back. I don't think I can do it again," Kara said, her eyes heavy with sadness. "Failure is part of the fight, Kara," George replied. "What matters is that you don't let it stop you from trying again. Every failure is a lesson, and every lesson makes you stronger." Under George's guidance, Kara became more active in community meetings. She was no longer just a listener, but a leader, encouraging others to voice their thoughts. She organized gatherings where people could share their stories and find support from the community. Her role became indispensable in uniting those who had been silent or oppressed, and she became a central figure in the fight for justice. George taught me that strength doesn't come from never making mistakes, but from never giving up. I want everyone in this community to feel that, Kara shared during a large community meeting. George continued his work as usual, meeting with community members, listening to them, and sharing lessons about resilience and respect. Though he sought no recognition, he had become a role model for others on how to live a life not just for oneself, but for the community. This change didn't come from a grand protest or extreme actions. It began with small steps, as each individual in the community realized the power of standing firm for what was right. George not only helped the community see that respect couldn't be forced, but also taught them that, in a sometimes cruel world, they could make a difference together. People who had once been silent and resigned to oppression were no longer afraid. They felt empowered to raise their voices and demand change. George's calmness and determination sparked hope and faith in justice within the community. Those who had once felt they could change nothing now understood that, with unity and perseverance, anything was possible. Their community wasn't a place of oppression, but a place where people stood together to defend their rights, where respect and justice were not distant ideals but values lived out in every small action. The community stood by George, not just because he had bravely faced Travis, but because of the values he represented: respect, integrity, and resilience in the face of adversity. Change didn't come from grandiose speeches or dramatic actions, but from each individual standing up for what was right and pushing back against injustice. As the community began to speak out and Travis's actions were exposed through the media, an official investigation was launched. City officials could no longer ignore the strong reactions from the community and were compelled to step in to uncover the truth. However, as the investigation progressed, George and the community discovered that not only was Travis under scrutiny, but external forces were working to protect him and tarnish George's reputation. A group of police officers closely connected to Travis initiated covert campaigns to discredit George and erode the community's trust in him. These attacks weren't overt, but involved sophisticated tactics such as manipulating media narratives, spreading misinformation, and planting malicious rumors. Influential figures within the police force, aware of Travis's standing in their ranks, attempted to draw the community into heated debates and conflicts to weaken the momentum of their accusations. George realized that this fight was no longer just between him and one corrupt officer, but with an entire system attempting to shield wrongdoing. Although he had no desire to engage in political disputes or schemes, the unfolding events pulled him into a far more intense battle than he had anticipated. While the community fought for justice, George became increasingly aware that the attacks on his reputation were becoming a significant threat. One of the most tense moments occurred during a city council meeting convened to discuss the issue. While some officials sided with the community, others, particularly those with ties to the police, tried to defend Travis and undermine the evidence the community had presented. A few influential police officers worked behind the scenes to exaggerate flaws in the investigation or smear George's image, branding him as an outsider or even an unnecessary meddler. During the hearing, George sat quietly in the front row, observing and listening to the criticisms from those unwilling to face the truth. They tried to downplay the community's evidence and claim that Travis's actions were merely misunderstandings and not serious. George knew that without resilience, the truth could be buried and the community's efforts could be undone. Yet, George didn't give up. The attacks from external forces only strengthened his resolve to uphold what was right. He wasn't just fighting for justice for himself, but for those who stood by him, for the community members who believed in fairness and shared values. In a tense moment, when the debate reached its peak, George rose to his feet, his steady gaze locking onto those who sought to diminish him and the community. This is not about me. It's about all of us. We stand not to defend an individual, but to uphold the values we all deserve: respect, justice, and fairness. These are not things anyone can take away from us. His words rang out like a powerful declaration in the tense chamber. They didn't just silence the room but inspired those who had supported him and the community, reminding them that this fight wasn't just one man's battle, but the struggle of an entire community. The tension surrounding the investigation continued to escalate, but one thing became clear. Despite the system's efforts to shield Travis's misconduct, George and the community stood firm. They were not just confronting a single corrupt officer, but an entire system that sought to obscure the truth. And in this battle, they knew that as long as they stood together, the truth would eventually prevail. After months of investigation, heated debates, and relentless pressure from the community, an official decision was finally made. In a tense city council meeting where arguments over Travis's misconduct were fierce, the outcome was that the young officer was suspended pending review, a temporary removal from his position until a formal decision could be reached by the authorities. This was not just a minor change in Travis's career, but a major turning point for the community that had fought so persistently. When the announcement of the suspension was made public, the shift in the atmosphere was palpable. The community finally felt a glimmer of hope for justice. Those who had stood against Travis's abuse of power now felt validated, knowing their fight hadn't been in vain. For months, they had faced silence and stubborn resistance from those in power. But now they saw that misconduct couldn't remain hidden forever, and those in authority would be held accountable. The community felt a restored sense of belief. Those who had previously stayed silent, enduring injustice for years, now felt pride in the changes they had helped create. They weren't just fighting for themselves, but for everyone who had suffered under abuses of power. Travis's suspension wasn't merely a personal victory for George and the community. It was a powerful message to the system. Misconduct would not be tolerated, and fairness must prevail in a just society. George, who had stood firm and unwavering throughout the struggle, sensed a profound change in the community. Though he never sought recognition or personal glory, he could feel the unity and strength that had grown among the people. Those who had stood alongside him, even if they had never directly challenged the authorities before, now felt more confident that they could bring about change by working together. Still, George's calm demeanor remained unchanged. He continued his work as he always had, without fanfare or self-congratulation. For him, the most important outcome wasn't personal acknowledgement, but the valuable lesson the community had learned about justice, the power of unity, and the importance of defending respect and dignity. As news of Travis's suspension spread through the community, those who had witnessed the transformation and the relentless efforts now understood that their struggle had not been in vain. Community meetings, discussions about fairness, and persistent gatherings had sparked an unstoppable wave of change. People in the neighborhood no longer felt like isolated individuals, but like a united collective capable of reshaping their circumstances and standing up for their rights and dignity. However, Travis's suspension was not the end of the fight. It was only the first step, but a critical one for the community. Leaders within the police force and government realized they could no longer protect misconduct as they had before. This shift not only altered the community's perception of the police, but also served as a warning to anyone in power. They would be held accountable for their actions and could no longer act with impunity. At that moment, as community members looked at one another with solidarity and determination, they understood that real change had to start with each individual. Travis's suspension wasn't just a punishment for his actions. It was an important step in building a more just and accountable society. Everyone in the community recognized that they could transform the world around them if they dared to stand up and defend what was right. Ultimately, while Travis would still face further investigations and final legal decisions, the most important outcome was the community's demonstration of unity, resilience, and determination. They had found strength within themselves, and this time they would not back down. After the announcement of Travis's suspension, a young man from the community, who had always admired George, decided to meet with him. He was eager to know how George felt when facing a powerful officer like Travis, and whether he had ever been afraid when confronted with such a formidable challenge. This question was not just out of curiosity, but a deep desire to understand courage, a concept the young man had always thought was exclusive to the truly strong. Sitting steadily before the young man, George replied gently, "Yes, I was afraid. Who wouldn't be afraid? Courage isn't about the absence of fear. Courage is acting despite how scared you are. When you face great challenges, when you stand against evil or injustice, fear is inevitable. But if you stop because of fear, you'll never accomplish anything meaningful." George's words rang with certainty, as though he was sharing an essential part of his life philosophy. He didn't try to dramatize or embellish the moment. Instead, he wanted the young man and the community to understand that courage isn't a privilege reserved for the fearless. It's a choice, a powerful decision to act no matter how scared you feel. "We all have our fears," George continued. "Maybe you're afraid of failure, of criticism, or that your efforts won't be rewarded. But courage is when you face those fears and do what's right, no matter what." George's words illuminated the young man's mind like a guiding light. He began to realize that courage wasn't something abstract or unreachable. It was tangible, embodied in actions, and choosing to move forward, even when your heart is in turmoil, and standing firm against risks, injustices, and difficulties. "You think courage is the absence of fear, but it's not," George added, his gaze steady as if revealing a profound truth of life. "Courage is acting despite fear. We can't avoid fear, but we can choose not to let it control us." This statement wasn't just a lesson for the young man, but a powerful message for everyone in the room. They began to understand that even in a world full of challenges and injustices, if they could stand up and do the right thing, they would never regret it. True courage isn't a lack of fear, but a choice to act despite it. George continued, "But don't forget, courage doesn't come from an individual alone. Real strength comes from the community. When we stand together, when we support one another, we can face any challenge. Everyone can stand on their own, but only when we all stand together can we create real change." He emphasized that while each individual could contribute their strength, it was through collective action that communities could overcome even the greatest difficulties. We are a collective. Each person in this community, whether young, old, or those who have faced hardships, can make a difference if we stand together. George's story wasn't just about personal courage, but about unity and the strength of the community. He taught that every individual in the community had a vital role to play. One person's respect and resilience could ripple outward, creating a profound impact and inspiring everyone to strive for change. As the young man listened to these words, he not only felt more confident, but also sensed a newfound inner strength rising within him. George's answer didn't just satisfy his question, but opened his eyes to what truly constituted strength. He realized that courage wasn't immediately visible. It lay in persistent actions and steadfast decisions made throughout a journey, no matter the fears or difficulties. George's words not only changed how the young man perceived courage, but also inspired everyone who was listening. It was a reminder that, in life, monumental change doesn't always start with grand actions, but with small, determined steps. acts of bravery, no matter how small, and, most importantly, unity within the community. Courage isn't something reserved for extraordinary people. It's something each of us can achieve if we don't give up and keep rising after every difficulty. George concluded, his gaze affirming that the community, having endured so many challenges, was now stronger than ever and would continue moving forward together. George remained a leader in the community, though he never sought attention or personal glory. Despite his past accomplishments, from dangerous CIA missions to facing challenges within the community, he didn't let those define him. To George, his true legacy wasn't in wartime victories or personal achievements, but in the lives he had influenced, the spirits he had uplifted, and the people he had empowered to face life's challenges. George understood that true strength doesn't come from one individual, but from the collective. He never saw himself as the sole agent of change. Instead, he emphasized that significant transformations could only happen when people united and stood together. Throughout his journey, he taught not only about courage and justice, but also about the power of human connection. It was this connection that created enduring strength, enabling the community to overcome any obstacle. The community George helped build was now stronger and more united than ever. Those who had previously hesitated and feared confronting societal issues no longer felt alone. They had learned that by standing together, they could overcome not just personal challenges, but also systemic ones. They recognized that true power didn't come from any one person, but from the collective will and unity of the group. Under George's leadership, the community fought not only for justice, but also became a symbol of change. People who once lived in the shadows of fear could now proudly stand up, speak the truth, and defend the values they believed in. George became a role model, not for his monumental victories, but because he helped others see the strength within themselves, that every individual could change their life and those of others. George didn't seek recognition or fame. He didn't need people to praise him for what he had done. To him, what mattered most was that this community realized that when they stood together, nothing could stop them. His legacy wasn't what he had accomplished for himself, but what he had helped the community achieve. He knew that even if he left this community one day, the strength and unity he had nurtured would endure. The community had become a resilient family, a place where everyone could rely on one another during tough times. As George looked at the faces filled with trust and hope around him, he knew the work he had started wasn't an end, but a beginning for a brighter future where everyone could make a difference. He didn't need to lead them forever because he knew this community was now strong enough to stand on its own and continue protecting the values they had built together. George's story wasn't one of an individual triumphing alone. It was the story of a community discovering its strength, of a group that stood up and fought not just for justice, but for unity and courage. Most importantly, it showed that when everyone in this community stood together, they created a power that was unbreakable. George recognized that change didn't come from grand actions or individual victories. It came from small but determined steps, from each person in the community contributing their strength to building a society rooted in justice and hope. And in that moment, George knew his legacy would never fade. His true strength wasn't in what he had done in the past, but in the people he had inspired and the communities he had helped build. That is the inspiring story of George Michael, who proved that true strength doesn't come from power or control, but from determination, unity, and courage in the face of injustice. If you were in George's position, would you have the courage to face such challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story and perspective. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share it with those you care about, and subscribe to the channel to catch more inspiring content. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.